Despite the fact that my college days were long over, I often found myself stopping at the ladies for a beer or two after work, particularly in and around this time. I had to pass through the city on my way home, and the pub was close to one of the freeway exits. That day, I managed to find street parking only a block away. The walk to the ladies was familiar and fun. I had walked that same path countless times between classes, and of course after classes for happy hour. I mentioned before that I attended school at the university hospital across from the ladies. I had also worked at the hospital while I attended school, so I spent a great deal of my time in and around the hospital, and of course at the ladies. The pub was located in a converted 3-story row home. The building itself was probably well over 100 years old, and you could feel it when you walked in. I didn't know the history of the place, but I was sure that it had one. When you walked into the pub, you could not help but take notice of how strangely narrow the building was, and made to look all the more so, as it was also very deep. The ground floor was easily 4 times longer front to back than it was wide. There were small tables right inside the door that you had to wade through to get to the bar proper. The bar itself was long and narrow like the room. It extended almost half the depth of the ground floor. Just as the bar started on your right, so did the booths on your left. Midway to the rear of the room, there was a little area with a payphone, doors to the restrooms, and stairs to the upper floors. The back room beyond this midsection had booths on both sides. The decorations were that of your typical American Irish pub. A lot of worn dark wood, shamrocks, Irish slogans, and advertisements of Irish whiskies and beers. Music played from no specific location, and that combined with the chatter of the patrons to create a scene that was very much alive. The place was always crowded and rowdy, the kind of place where you have to yell to be heard, and no one seems to mind. As I said before, it was here that I met my first celebrity. Okay, I may be overstating it a bit. Not sure he was really a celebrity, and I'm not sure I ever really met him either. Robert Tex Huntington was a former boxing heavyweight champion of the world, the lone biker of the apocalypse, and a long-time Philly resident. It was during college I had met some of my friends at the ladies, and they told me that a bona fide star often came to the ladies to drink. I did not believe them. I was late getting there, and most of them had been drinking for several hours before I arrived, so it was very likely they were mistaken or trying to play a trick on me. Sensing my disbelief, they continued to try and convince me that not only was Tex a major star, but that he spent a great deal of time at the ladies. Do you remember that movie? It was a comedy. A cop and an ex-con kidnap a baby, and they get chased by a crazy bounty hunter on a motorcycle, the lone biker of the apocalypse. I knew the movie. It was one of my favorites, and still is. It was a zany 80s movie. The cop gets to know the ex-con, as she was the one who takes his mugshot every time he was arrested. They fall in love, and after he gets released from prison, they marry. Soon thereafter, they realize they cannot have children of their own. I know this sounds very dismal, but trust me, it is hilarious. In any event, they become aware of a wealthy family that has quintuplets born to them. Our cop and ex-con come to the conclusion that 5 was more than anyone can handle, so they decide to steal one of the 5 to raise as their own. Enter the bounty hunter, and hijinks ensue. This was clearly not an Academy Award-winning movie, but it was fun, and I was familiar with the character and the actor. He was a Philly native and a former heavyweight boxer with a checkered past. Just the type of colorful character that made for interesting conversation and that every 20-something would love to meet. "Why would he come in here?" I yelled. "Why wouldn't he?" was the response. "I have to assume he has better places to be, I replied, hoping that would end the conversation. "Nah, he comes in here all the time. He feels like he owes the owner some debt of gratitude. When he was down and out, the owner took him in and gave him a job. This is where he worked while he trained to fight. Now, whenever he comes in, the owner gives him free drinks. What better reason would you need to come in here?" "Yeah, he is in here like once a week," someone else chimed in. He is not fighting anymore, and he hasn't done a film in a while. What else does he have to do? Besides, he lights up the place." "What do you mean?" I asked, but soon found out. "Haw, haw, haw." Over the usual noise came a booming expression of joy and happiness that simply drowned out all other sounds. I looked in the direction of the sound. Standing by the first booth was an enormous man with a tremendously large head, made to look even larger by his huge fro of thick, coarse brown hair. He had his head tilted back and was letting loose the loudest belly laugh I had ever heard. It would have been annoying in any other context, but here it seemed to simply belong. You could not help but to smile, and I did. He saw me staring out of the corner of his eye. He returned my smile and raised his glass in my direction. I returned his gesture, and we both turned back our attentions to our respective parties. From that time forward, I was a fan. That was a long time ago. As I stepped into the ladies that night, after my deposition with the human parasite, I wasn't planning on meeting anyone. It was also very unlikely that the lone biker of the apocalypse would be there either. I recall quite distinctly that as I walked toward the ladies that evening, I could not help but feel as though I was being watched. But of course, how could I not be? I was in the city, after all, and it was early evening in the springtime. The city was very much alive, and there were people everywhere. Literally, everyone could see me. The feeling, though, was not just being seen, but watched. With all that was going on in my head that day, I paid it little attention and continued on my way. Going into the ladies was always a comfortable and familiar experience. I think that is why I enjoyed going there as much as I did. It was always warm and dim, with soft glowing lights illuminating little pockets of activity. Not that there wasn't activity outside the illuminated areas, it's just that the lights allowed you to see what was going on in those areas that were illuminated. Rest assured, the dark places were always just as active. It was also always loud, but that added to the atmosphere of the place. Few other places can you feel so intimate and isolated with those that you are with, while at the same time feeling like being an integral part of the larger group of pub goers. It was surreal, if anyone ever bothered to stop to think about it. But perhaps it is like this at everyone's favorite watering hole. On that occasion, I did not see any of my usual acquaintances or friends. The bartender was not familiar to me either. Admittedly, I was never really friendly with the staff anyway, so this was not strange. I ordered a beer and then leaned back in my seat so that I could take in the view. It was a typical weekday night. The place was full and loud. The booths were almost full to overflowing with patrons standing around them, or else sitting in chairs pilfered from smaller parties. Everyone was either actively listening to a story or waiting for a chance to tell their own, and everyone was in some state of intoxication. Despite being surrounded by so many people, I was able to find the solitude and anonymity I was looking for. I was looking to hide and unplug and perhaps take the sting out of the day. The loudness of the place created a feeling of isolation. I felt invisible and alone, which is what I wanted at that particular moment. While I waited for my beer, I looked around the bar and went over in my head the events of the day again. My mind was always racing, going over facts and processes in my head, retracing steps, exactly the type of activity I was hoping to retard by having a few beers. Unfortunately, my beer had not yet arrived. I was left swimming in my own thoughts. I thought about the case I was working on. I thought again about the plaintiff. How could anyone live like that? It was alien to me that anyone would want to live that way. But in the same token, maybe I was a little bit jealous. Yeah, you read that right. Let me explain. I have always worked. From a relatively early age, if there was anything I wanted in life, I had to go out and get it. I had to work for it. Now, I'm not complaining about that. My wife and my children, we have good lives. As a lawyer, I made a decent living, but I worked for it, and I worked hard for it. The plaintiff I saw that day appeared relatively happy, even despite his alleged grievous life-altering injuries and bouts of depression. He clearly had more than his fair share of food. The rub? I spent the entire night before preparing for that deposition. I reviewed reams of evidence, performed a significant amount of legal research, and drafted outline after outline of my deposition questions. The plaintiff? He rolled out of bed and spent much of the 4-hour deposition on his phone helping his friend calm his crazy paramour. In the end, my firm would earn $250 per hour to help pay my salary, which, by the way, is significantly less than $250 per hour, while the plaintiff would walk away with approximately $10,000 after his attorney took his cut. If the plaintiff was able to stay on public assistance, bring a couple similar lawsuits this year and continue to live with Ma in her double-wide trailer, he could have a relatively easy life. Hell, he might even be able to take a modest vacation without ever having to even bathe. I know how bitter and cynical this all sounds. I know the counter-arguments as well. You shouldn't judge a man until you've walked a mile in his shoes, and all that bullshit. The fact is, we all have obstacles that we must overcome, and we all face adversity in our lives. The difference is how one handles those issues. Some would look at the plaintiff and feel sad for him. Of course he does not work. He is in no condition to work. While this may be true, he is at least partially to blame for his condition. One does not get to that size without eating copious amounts of food to grow to that size and maintain it. Glandular issues or no, others might say, well, we all contribute to public assistance. We should be able to benefit from it. True again. The plaintiff has never contributed to it, and likely never will. I imagine him sitting at home in those filthy clothes, stuffing Cheetos into his face while he watches Judge Judy, and laughing at poor stiffs like me working our lives away. It is infuriating. To me, the worst part is that many of these people have taken the attitude that these benefits, like public assistance, are owed to them. While I was in law school, I took a class on health law. The course focused on issues like right to die, euthanasia, do not resuscitate orders, and similar topics. We watched a video in the class. It was an excerpt from a news broadcast that included an interview with a woman suffering from a severe form of cerebral palsy. Her condition was such that she was confined to a wheelchair and she was only capable of communicating with mechanical assistance. Although she was only 20 years old, she looked much older. Her condition had taken its toll on her body and her limbs were contorted in what appeared to be painful positions as she struggled to sit still and operate the joystick attached to her chair that allowed her to communicate using a synthesized voice. When I was born, my condition was so extreme that my doctors did not think I would live more than a few years. They were of the opinion that even if I did survive for any appreciable period of time, that I would not and could not enjoy any real quality of life. They tried to talk my parents into signing a DNR order for me. The camera shifted to the interviewer. Her mock concern was palpable in her voice and expression. It was clear that someone wanted an Emmy so bad. But they didn't sign, did they? No, they took me home, took care of me, and loved me. The doctors said that I would never be able to communicate with the outside world, that I would never be able to interact. My parents would not accept that diagnosis. They hired experts and they worked with me every day. The interviewer interrupted. And thanks to their efforts, you were not only able to finish high school, but you were also able to go to college and complete your associate's degree in accounting. Isn't that right? Yes, that's correct.